Hey, I'm James from Smokin' Dad Barbecue, and today I am sharing my best practices for getting a great seasoning on your offset smoker. And if you're in a northern climate like me with the winter months just around the corner, now is the perfect time to put this on your weekend to-do list. Like many of you, when I picked up my first offset smoker a couple years ago, I relied on the advice of some of the most popular videos on YouTube, only to find out there are a couple flaws with that method that just weren't giving me a result that was protecting my offset smoker from rust and led to a couple of extra issues. So with a couple years under the belt, I want to share some of the tweaks in the method and technique that I've developed for getting a great seasoning on my newer offset smokers so that you can avoid some of the same mistakes that maybe I fell into. Without further ado, let's get started. So one of the biggest issues that I see is oil selection. And this is not necessarily a bad thing because an oil on your firebox with a high smoke point around 450 degrees or higher, something like avocado oil or even canola oil is a popular one and used in products like Pam. This can work great on your firebox, but it just doesn't get hot enough in other parts of our offset in order to polymerize that oil into a great finish. And this can lead to a couple problems, notably that we have sticky metal that does not have a protective coating on it, so over the winter months this can rust, or sticky surfaces can cause other problems. They tend to be a magnet for things like dust in the backyard, so you get maybe bubbling on your surface which can flake off, which only leads to exacerbate the problem once we start dealing with rain, snow, and the cold weather, wanting to accelerate the development of rust on our offset. Let me demonstrate what a great non-stick surface looks like and what we are trying to develop with proper technique of polymerizing oils on our offset. So since I have two offsets, I wanted to demonstrate a good seasoning versus a less than ideal seasoning. So on our good seasoning, which you can see here on my Smoke North Echo reverse flow, there is no discoloration where we are getting a bit of a cure polymerization going on one side and then working our way back all the way to something that looks like raw steel on the other side. It is completely uniform in color, but more importantly than the color, it's what you can feel here when we touch the offset. This feels just like a cast iron pan that has been properly seasoned you'd be using in your indoor oven, and it is smooth as glass all the way around. Yesterday, to get ready for today's video, I did some of the things that I did early on following that popular advice, and I sprayed a higher smoke point oil all over my Huron Gen 2. And what that's started to do, you can see here where we're not getting proper polymerization. This is because we have too much oil when you're just spraying too much oil aggressively, as well as not getting a hot enough temperature to reach the smoke point where that is starting to polymerize. And because of that, this is completely sticky. It feels almost like a fly trap in terms of how tacky the outside surface is. And like a fly trap, everything that's outside is starting to stick to it. So whatever this is, hair, dust, this has only been 24 hours. This debris is completely attaching itself to the offset, and even as I'm rubbing it, not wanting to come off. This is just that sticky. So if this is what we don't want, let me show you the technique and the method to get the type of seasoning finish that we do want. So while cooking with wood, I like to cook with wood. When we want to get something like a hot fire really quick, accelerating our coal bed is going to save us some time and money. Charcoal is less expensive than properly seasoned hardwood, so I'm going to add just a little bit of Fogo to the bottom to give us a base layer of coals to help accelerate our polymerization process. Like all my fires, I like to start with kiln-dried, this is kiln-dried grocery store birch wood. So birch wood is a hardwood, but the fact that it's kiln-dried means it's gonna be like paper and ignite very quickly, which is just gonna save us some time, as well as help heat soak our pit. Something that is really important for getting a good polymerization is properly heat soaking about 900 pounds of raw steel. So let's grab our Grill Blazer grill gun and fire it up. Looks good. So while we're waiting for our pit to build up some temperature so we can start the seasoning process, let me share a couple other best practices. Normally I'd be done with something like my Grill Blazer grill gun at this point and be putting it away, but we're actually going to use this for another step. No matter how hot I get my offset. I never get enough temperature down the support legs or near the wheels to build a protective seasoning. And this is one of the #1 areas prone to rust. And so what we're gonna do is apply a little bit of oil and then use our torch to target, blast sear, and get that metal up beyond the temperature needed for properly polymerizing the oil. So as you can see here, we continue to build on a great protective coat all over our offset. My next 2 tips are ambient temperature and location. These will make a big difference. Now with something like my thick raw steel, so we're 1/2 inch and all places are up to 3/4 of an inch, or in some areas of our firebox, I can get enough heat built into this even in the coldest of winter months. But just like in your oven, you get the best result seasoning cast iron, where you bring it up to a temperature, let it sit there for an hour, and then turn the oven off and leave it there all day. And this slow cooling off process tends to give me the absolute best result. And I find even though I can season my offset in the winter months, I get a much better polymerization effect doing it in warmer temperatures of 70 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer. The part 2 of that, or for my 3rd tip, is the time of day and or the location. And so where I am, as you can start to see on my Huron Gen 2 behind me, the sun is just starting to work its way around the corner. So I'm starting this at a time of day where we are going to get a little extra help of some direct sunlight when we're at our warmest temperatures. And this is just going to help accelerate the process of polymerizing the oils all over our pit as it is baking in the hot sun. It'll just make it much easier. So let's give this a couple more minutes. I'll grab an IR gun and show you our target temperatures. And once we reach a warm enough temperature to polymerize those oils, I'll walk you through oil selection for different locations on your offset, the techniques that I use for applying the oil to get the absolute best results, and everything else you need to know to get your offset ready for the winter months. So our pit is nearly up to temperature, but while we're waiting, let me cover a couple other tools that come in really handy when building a great seasoning. I already covered something like my Grill Blazer grill gun. This will help get those hard to reach places where we don't build enough heat. Next is something like an infrared gun. So this is a ThermoWorks IR gun. I also, if I have it out here, which of course I don't, but is my ThermaPen with a built-in IR temperature reader. Either one of these will work equally well, especially for the temperatures that we're going to be looking for today, which is below 600 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the maximum of the IR gun, and why you might need to step up to something like this, which I use in my pizza oven where we're getting much higher temperatures. But this will help make sure that we are at the proper temperature before applying our oil. Next is, instead of paper towel, I like to use these shop towels. So Home Depot and many other places sell these, but these are low in lint, and this is not going to help get white fluff as the paper towel starts to tear and actually build that into our seasoning. It's one of those small little details if you don't think about the first time you do it, and then the next day you go to check your work and you've got a gritty sort of white fluff finish baked into your offset. So going with a towel like this, or even better, a microfiber cloth, if you have a couple of those that you don't mind destroying in the process, those will work as well. Also handy on the list is some high heat gloves. I regularly use for handling food something like cotton oven gloves with some nitrile protection. This does not offer enough protection for handling a hot paper towel and having oil on it and touching your offset, and that will come through. Once the heat comes through the glove, it will absolutely burn you. So I recommend getting a pair of high heat gloves that are rated to 700 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, like these ones. So next is oil selection. So this is about having the right tool for the job. So on our firebox, we can get away with almost any high heat oil, whether you had avocado oil or grapeseed oil, or even what I'm going to use here today, a canola spray, which is about 450 degrees Fahrenheit in terms of its polymerization. This is going to help stand up to abuse in our firebox. If I were to go with my flaxseed oil option on the firebox, running a high heat fire, even like what we're going to do today for seasoning, will destroy that seasoning and break it down to the point where we're back to raw steel. So this is not the right selection for our firebox, but equally true, this is not the right selection for everything else on our offset. So I like a spray. You could use PAM, canola oil, or anything like that around the 400 to 500 degree smoke temperature range. This will work really well. In terms of our oil and applying it, you have a couple options. You can get one of your rags or your cloths damp and use an application in a bowl and start to apply that. This is not my favorite way of doing it, because what tends to happen is you get drips, and those drips drips are running down, particularly like me if you're on a patio, those are going to stain your stones. Or if you're trying to cover a large area, it'll be on too thick and you don't have time to come back and wipe that down thin. The proper amount of oil is almost invisible, to the point where I'm not sure I covered this area. That is the perfect amount of oil. You don't need to see a pool of oil in order to get a great seasoning. In fact, the opposite is true. You get the best results when it's barely visible to the naked eye. And so by going with something like a spray bottle, even though it doesn't spray perfectly, I've tried a couple of those different oil misters, and by the time you get the pump action going and they clog up and they don't work, it's just more frustrating, particularly when you're dealing with hot, high heat gloves or a hot offset. So even though this won't spray perfectly, a cheap dollar store spray bottle will do the trick, where you can spray and then immediately wipe to it's almost to the point you can't tell it's there. So these are the tools that we need to pull off the perfect seasoning. Let's go check our temperatures with the IR gun and see if it is ready to move into our seasoning phase. So we are not quite there. I can still touch the door, and we're just about to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Normally you would need to be in around the 400 to maybe 450 degrees Fahrenheit temperature. So let me show you with the IR gun. So we're getting a temperature on our door of 152 degrees Fahrenheit. The end here of our cook chamber, a little bit closer, 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And along the top where it will be the hottest, once it is fully heat soaked, I'm sure I can see that, 175 degrees Fahrenheit. And our smokestack, which will be the coolest, working its way all the way down near the top to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So we are not hot enough, but we can actually help things along by coming over to our smokestack and adjusting our damper instead of being wide open to start to build some of that heat. So let's go do that now. So right now, all of the heat is leaving our offset, which is just going to cause us to burn through more wood. So let's close this to about the 20% closed, so 80% open, which will help make sure that we're still burning a nice wide open fire, but trap a little bit more heat. So I'll come back in another 10 minutes and see where we're at. So while we're waiting for our chamber to reach temperature, we can also take the time now to get started on our legs. And even though we're nearly there on our chamber, there's next to no heat near the bottom of the legs. Even though up near the top of the chamber, I can definitely feel a little bit of warmth, but that's not going to be enough to season anything from kind of the halfway point down. So the first thing I want to do is get some tin foil. And since I'm going to be using my grill gun to get a little bit of heat onto this lower section, I do not want to be hitting my wheels as they are rubber and or the mechanism. So I'm just going to put a little bit of protection around the bottom part of our wheel assembly. Well, tin foil will not give me much protection. It'll give me the chance to apply my torch and do a couple passes without doing any damage to everything down below. So next I'm going to use an application towel to get the oil on here. It's a little bit more accurate for working around the wheels than something like spray, especially if you don't want to get that oil onto your patio stones. So now I'm just going to apply some oil on all the exposed raw metal surfaces. That tin foil will also help catch anything I'm a little too aggressive on. And then using the non-heavily oiled side, I'm going to wipe off almost as much of that oil that I could see that I just put on, and that is going to be the perfect amount. Next, we'll grab our torch. I'm using a Grill Blazer grill gun. And again, we only need to get the oil to a temperature of about 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So we do not need to blast this for a long time, just a quick little blast. Remove our foil, and this leg's done. I'll do the exact same thing on all 4 other legs, and then I'll meet you over by our cook chamber for our actual seasoning. Okay, right on time. We're now up to 400 degrees, which I think should be getting us pretty close. So we're up to about 220 degrees on our door, which will be the coolest. We are over the part that we need for polymerization everywhere else. I'm not seeing anywhere else below 259 degrees Fahrenheit. So by the time we get the oil on, this will continue to build up temperature and be exactly where we need it. Got our high heat gloves, our towel, as well as our flaxseed oil. This is why I like the sprayer, even though it doesn't spray very well, is we're gonna quickly blast this with a little bit of oil and then try and wipe off near all of it before it starts to polymerize. Little spray, and like I said, wipe off right away. This top 6 or 8 inches is done. Do the lower part of our door. Okay, that looks good. Let's do the inner part of our door where we've got a bit of overlap right along the edges. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. That is perfect. So let's close that back up. Next we can do our dome cap. So let's get ready to do the backside of our offset. But at this point I want to change out towels. This is starting to absorb too much oil where it's not going to remove enough, and that will start to give us a bit of a spotty finish. Spray along. This wiping very quickly is what helps get this nice smooth finish versus letting it start to burn, and that's where we're going to get a bit of a textured, tacky, sticky finish that I personally don't like. Next we'll do our collector and our chimney before moving on to our firebox, where we're going to change oils. I've sprayed just a little bit of oil onto my towel in order to do my chimney stack here. So last but not least is our firebox. Now I'm okay to do my flat top here since this is exactly the temperature range that I want, around 430 degrees Fahrenheit. So this part is okay. What's actually too hot is our firebox. So if I were to get a temperature on that, this is just going to burn the oil. So I'm going to spray it on, show you what that looks like. But I actually build seasoning on my firebox during cooking. As any normal cook, this is going to be hot enough to do our firebox, whereas I need this high temperature for my flat top. So I'll show you what it looks like, but just know that this is going to burn down here because we're a little bit too hot as it is. Spray that on. You can see as soon as we hit off of my flat top, it is burning, and as quickly as I can switch hands, I want to wipe that off. So quick recap, not one size fits all in terms of oil. Make sure we're using the right oil for the right part of our offset. I like to get organic flax on my cook chamber and something like canola on my firebox. Second is quantity. So make sure that we are just not overspraying this and letting it bake. That will work, but you're going to get drips as well as a non-smooth, sort of sticky, tacky texture that will just lend itself to the environment adhering to your offset. That just happens to be a recipe for rust, particularly in the colder months. And I find, I mentioned earlier, I've already done 2 coats on my Echo Reverse Flow. This is now my 3rd coat. This should be enough in order to take me into the winter months. I do have a cover which will help extend my period of protection, but even with the cover, snow and sleet and ice, everything likes to find its way into those little nooks and crannies. So 3 applications should be enough to keep me seasoned and rust-free all winter. At this point, anything else that I would add is just for personal preferences on color. If you want, we're already losing a bit of that raw metal look and starting to get to that dark painted black look that something like my cheap offset smoker, my Oklahoma Joe's, comes painted. It looks great the day that it's new, and after a couple uses it quickly looks old. Whereas a raw steel offset looks like a raw steel offset day one, and if you want to get it black, that can only be achieved over building multiple layers of seasoning. You're probably going to be about 5 to 7 applications all in to start to get as black as something like my Huron Gen 2 behind me. If there's anything that I didn't cover, you have a question, let me know down in the comments. I do my best to check those out, and or join me on a monthly members live where we can interact in a bit of a real-time basis versus these pre-recorded videos and answer any questions that might be on your mind. That's it for today though. I'm James from Smoking Dad Barbecue signing off, and remember, don't be afraid to fire it up, even if it is just for seasoning your offset. See you next time.